Okie doke. Don't forget, as far as our prayer list is concerned, we do still have the Dixon family and some of them that, one of the things I said this morning is that, especially when you got Pat living in a place by herself, you know, that they got a lot of stuff to get done, take care of. The funeral's not the end of everything. They still got a ways. So, and that's really hard when you have to go through all those things and sort it and all that. So remember them. That little Liam, the 3-year-old, is he seems to be over everything. They were concerned about whether something would happen. He's the little one that quit breathing, and luckily somebody at the house knew. Small child CPR got him back again, and he was in the hospital. And at first they thought he had this, thought he had that. He turned out he's fine now. So, and as talking about little children, we had Kessler Waltz on there. That's Luke and Jordan's littlest one. He had that RSV. And Steve says, his grandpa said this morning, you could take him off the list and probably need to put his mom and dad on, because he's making up for lost time. He's what, about 2.5, 3 years old. So and then that Jordan Scott, we got about as good a news. She's off all pain medications. Right now her surgeries are over. They were supposed to take the ventilator out. She was texting and writing and all of that. And you know, this is a girl that was in a car wreck 2 Fridays ago. And they weren't sure whether she would survive the night. So she had a torn aorta and all that. So a few quick announcements. Next Sunday is the day we celebrate All Saints Day. So if you've had anybody you've lost, you might check with Kathy, make sure we got them all on the list. And then Veteran Sunday's coming up. We have Charge Conference on November the 19th. And then tomorrow night we'll be doing Halloween on the Square. You can come as you are, or wear a costume so you look a little better, or what. And yeah, Randy.
I wanted to say that my friend Bob Pratt is doing better. When I got an update on Friday on that issue.
Oh yeah.
I haven't heard anything today. I usually get an update on Sunday. And pray for my dad. His house was supposed to be ready October 15th. Now they told him that he can't get in there until January 1st.
Okay, Randy said his friend that we talked about that had the shingles that had to be taken to the hospital, he's doing a lot better. Pray for his dad, because he was supposed to get into a house and at any time, and they've bumped that back about another month or so. So that's always just.
Time change next Sunday.
And there is a time change next Sunday. So, and Bob Pound, yeah, remember Bob Pound and all that he's going through right now. So, so we have the candy thing coming up tomorrow night, 5 to 7. We'll be over by the RMC building. Haven't heard if they've told us a place to be up. That's where we've been for 3 years. That's where we're setting up again.
According to what it said on Park County Chatter, everybody's wherever they were at last year.
Okay.
That's what they were saying.
Martha said there was something on Park County Chatter said go to wherever you were last year. And then something that we talked about this morning, that on Wednesday, December the 7th at 7, we are having Westward Road come. They are a family gospel group. I thought it was 2 brothers and a sister, but I got corrected today that from their website, because looking at the picture, that's a mom and a dad and their son, and the mom and the dad don't look old enough to have a son that old. So I knew they were all related, but anyway, it goes. You can look them up and listen to the music online or whatever, Westward Road, and they're going to be here on December the 7th. We're really excited and looking forward to that. There's no ticket price or anything. It's just going to be a free will offering. So, you know, if you come and you can't give anything, that's fine. If you can give more, that's even better. But either way, we just like to have a church full of people for all of that. So with that, then, and then I think I announced we have Charge Conference on the 19th. So, all right, let's pray. Father, we just thank you for this day and for the rain that we needed so desperately. Lord, we just thank you for this place to be, for your word, being able to gather as your people, having the ability to read and possess your word, Lord, and just to learn and to be in your house. and to gather together, whether we be in your house or in somebody else's house, Lord, but we all come together. And we just thank you for that. And we pray for all these people that we've mentioned on this night, Lord, and we just thank you for all the things that are going on within the church. And we just ask that you bless all these things and be with us on this evening. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All righty. We're actually getting ready to start Exodus 11. But it kind of all ties together, and I'm going to start reading at 10:24 because it's all one section. We kind of stopped in the middle. So then Pharaoh summoned Moses and said, "Go worship the Lord, even your women and children may go with you, only leave your flocks and herds behind." But Moses answered, "You must allow us to have sacrifices of burnt offerings to present to the Lord our God. Our livestock too must go with us. Not a hoof is to be left behind. We have to use some of them in worshiping the Lord our God. Until we get there, we will not know what we are to use to worship the Lord." But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he was not willing to let them go. Pharaoh said to Moses, "Get out of my sight. Make sure you do not appear before me again. The day you see my face, you will die." "Just as you say," Moses replied, "I will never appear before you again." Now we're going to actually jump down to verse 4 because that's where the conversation takes up. There's what they call an editorial gloss in the middle. We'll come back to that. So going down to 11:4. So Moses said, "This is what the Lord says. About midnight I will go throughout Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, to the firstborn son of the slave girl who is at her handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle as well. There will be loud wailing throughout Egypt, worse than ever has been or ever will be again. But among the Israelites, not a dog will bark at any man or animal. Then you will know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. All these officials of yours will come to me, bowing down before me and saying, 'Go, you and all the people who follow you.' After that, I will leave." Then Moses, hot with anger, left Pharaoh. So that's the whole conversation. You know, it didn't just stop when Pharaoh said, "Get out of my sight. If I ever see you again, I'm going to kill you." And Moses said, "Fine, but let me tell you something." It's kind of the way that went. And we kind of miss that because of those first 3 verses that are there. And that's just kind of a reference back, it's setting up, you know, it's kind of in the middle of the conversation saying, now before we get the rest of it, I want you to remember what God told Moses in the wilderness. And that's where we're going to pick up with 11:1 now. Now the Lord said to Moses, "I will bring one or more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt, and after that he will let you go from here. And when he does, he will drive you out completely. Tell the people that men and women are like to ask our neighbors for articles of silver and gold." The Lord made the Egyptians favorably disposed towards the people, and Moses himself was highly regarded in Egypt by Pharaoh's officials and by the people. And some of your Bibles may even have some of that in parentheses and things. But this is, God had told Moses this before he went in. He'd actually told him on the way traveling through the wilderness coming back from Midian that this is how it was going to end up, that the firstborn sons would be taken from the Egyptians as a retribution for the children of Israel dying. And so now God has told him again, it's time for that one more plague. How many has there been? 9. 3 threes. So 9, and now the 10th. And then God says, when he lets you go this time, it's going to be completely. And why does he say that? Yeah, Martha said, because every time before, it was, well, you got to lead the men and the women. Or, you got to lead the women and the children. Or you got to lead the flocks. Or you got to do this. Or you got to do that. And this time, it's not just that he's going to let them go. What's he going to do? Drive them out. It's, you've been asking to be let go, and he's not letting you go. He could just release you, and you could leave casually. But he's going to drive you out completely. That means everybody, everything. And that, what else does that mean? You're not coming back. So now, one of the things God told Moses in the wilderness too is that there would come a time in which they would basically plunder the Egyptians without any force. And so what's he say here as he reminds Moses of that? Yep, ask him for articles of silver and gold. Now, they're neighbors. And that's one of those terms that, just like in the New Testament, you remember when Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan? It all started about, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul, and all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And what was the question that the Jews asked? Who is my neighbor? And that had been debated for centuries, because the word neighbor and the way that it is, because usually when we say neighbor, who do we think of? Right next door, and or across the street, or that sort of thing. Well, if you're talking about right next door or across the street, who would they be talking about? The other Jews, yeah. And the other Jews aren't going to have gold and silver, but there are times that we use that word in a different way. It wasn't too long ago that somebody was talking about Canada and said, the neighbors to the north. And so you're talking about a whole country there, and we use that as far as, in a bigger scale than just who lives next door to us, who lives in our, quote, neighborhood, or the area around us, and all that. So, that's what it's speaking about here. It's speaking about the Egyptians. And now, why are the Egyptians going to give that money or give those things? Yeah. It says because they were favorably inclined to do that. And now there's three kind of views to that. One of them is that they saw that God was with them, and there's that whole view that we talked about before with the geographical gods, that whoever's people's God is the strongest is the ones that's going to win in those situations. Whose God's been winning? The Jews. And so you want to kind of appease them to appease their God so that nothing else happens to you. The second one is like Marty said, and that is that we'll give you whatever you want, just get out of here. We've had enough, we can't take anymore. Just go. And then the third one is, and it kind of goes along with that the Lord made Egyptians, that he actually changed their heart. But they could change them in any of those ways. So I don't think it could be. I don't think it's so much divine intervention as it is just go. I'm kind of in the same thing with Marty. Just go. Here, take this stuff. Get out of here. What else am I going to do? And just to get them out. And what does it say about Moses? Yep. Highly regarded in Egypt by whom? Pharaoh's officials. Not just the other people, but the courtiers, because they've been able to see there's something to this Moses. And, now, doesn't get much more bold than what Moses just did. He just told Pharaoh, your son's going to die. Firstborn son of everybody in your kingdom is going to die. And then you will, and your people are going to come and bow down to me. So, they're seeing all that. And plus, if you remember the last couple of plagues, they were telling Pharaoh, said, when are you going to quit? Don't you see that Egypt is ruined? And so they're seeing Moses now as actually a more powerful leader than Pharaoh. And so in a lot of places, especially in the Middle East even today, and third world countries and all that, strong leaders are highly revered by people around. And so that's what we have here. So anyway, Moses tells Pharaoh, this is what, before I leave, this is what you need to understand. About midnight. And what day? He hadn't said yet, because there's when we get into the Passover, There's a 4-day window there. Now, has Moses already told those people to get, well, what that 4, I guess I'd say what that 4-day window is. We're going to read about it in a minute. But they were supposed to get the lamb or a kid, it could be a sheep or a goat, and hold on to it for 4 days before the slaughter. So, you can take that, and he's just saying, one of these nights about midnight, this is going to happen. Or it could be tonight. And Moses has already told the people to prepare those things. Either way, doesn't really matter. But he's telling Pharaoh again, every firstborn son from your son. And I mean, to stop and think about that. To tell Pharaoh to stand there and look at him. Pharaoh's already said, get out of my face. You ever see me again, you will die. And Moses says, one more thing's going to happen, and your son is going to die.
Yeah, Moses had told them when, Pharaoh would probably let us know.
Yeah. Yeah, but part of it too, I think, comes back to that, and it is this, and he mentions it, and we'll get down to that phrase in a minute, but it's another one of those, this is what's going to happen. Are you able to stop it? You know, if somebody told any of us, your child is going to die tomorrow, whether that child, you know, and it doesn't say that in the movies, it's always some little kid. You know, I can remember the old Cecil B. DeMille and Charlton Heston thing. You know, Pharaoh's holding his little son in his arms. His son might have been 40 years old. We don't know. And so now it only mentions the one, but had Pharaoh's son been old enough to have kids, it could have been 1, 2, 3 generations within Pharaoh's house that died. But it does say son, singular, and so it sounds like he's only got one firstborn son, that son's not had any other children, or probably would have said, you know, your firstborn son and the firstborn sons of all your sons, because that's the way that it would have been. So, about midnight. And the other thing too is it's kind of a, you know, the Egyptians believed in the sun god. It was the god of life and all that. So obviously the sun god can't do it because it's going to go at a time where he can't do anything about it. Now, who all is going to be involved in this?
Everybody down to the slave girl.
Everybody down to the slave girl. And so, from the Pharaoh who sits on the throne, and everybody knows who that is, all the way down, and that's saying from the greatest to the least. The slave girl was at the bottom. You know, the slave man or the slave boy, there was men and women, boys and girls. Would have been man, woman, boy, girl. The slave girl's about as low as it gets. And of course, you know, this is a girl old enough to have a child or whatever, but anyway, if she's got a firstborn son, it's going to die.
Why the firstborn of the cattle?
Huh?
Why the firstborn of the cattle?
Well, the firstborn of the cattle, just to show that it's not something just among the people, that God has that same thing. And there wouldn't have been a whole lot of cattle around. And actually, it ends up saying later that it was all the firstborn of all the livestock, just to say it's all the way across. It's God doing it. It's not people. It's not some sort of disease or anything like that. That it is people. And the other part, if it was a disease, who would it affect? Females. So there's now the firstborn is really significant because all throughout history, and even we just saw it a couple of weeks ago. The firstborn son is the one that in those kind of cultures, in our culture we've kind of gotten away from it so much. But the firstborn son was the one that you hung everything on. The firstborn son, if you were a pharaoh, if you were about anything, the firstborn son is the one who took your place, was what we would call the heir apparent. The firstborn son in the times of the Egyptians, and even in the time of Jesus, with the Hebrews, or the Jews, as they were called by that time, they got twice as much as the next son, who got twice as much as the next son, and it just kind of went down by that. So if you were very far down the line, like if you were David and you were the 8th son, you weren't going to get it. You might get a couple of animals. That'd be about it. So the firstborn son it's not just going to be Pharaoh's son. That is to be the next king, and that actually that wasn't something that was just lost on those people. It comes into play later on in a couple of ways. While they're out in the wilderness, they're not out there very long, and they start the priesthood. Moses' brother Aaron and his sons and his grandsons. And to be a priest, you have to be a descendant of Aaron. But who is the high priest always? The firstborn son. So it was Aaron, his firstborn son, Eleazar, Phinehas, and it goes all the way down, so that when it gets all the way down, even to the time of Jesus, the high priest would have been the firstborn son of the high priest before him, of the high priest before him. And then we got at least 4 books that specifically talk about firstborn sons. And do you know what those are called? It's all about the sons. 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Because it was, he died, he was buried in the family tomb. Well, there was a few of them, they said he wasn't good enough to be buried in the family tomb. And then the firstborn son took over. Now, that's kind of on the high end. And all the officials, all those things. And the one I was talking about here recently, who was the firstborn son that was just given everything? Huh? Charles. King Charles. You know, mom died. He's got other brothers. He's got that one that ought to be in jail, but we don't get on that today. So, but and even they already know who's going to be the next king. William, his son, and then there's Harry that's kind of acting out because he's not going to be king. But people are people. But anyway, so you know some of that stuff's still going on today, and now. When you get to the other people, though, you know, there's a couple of thoughts around this killing of the firstborn. What was happening, or what began to happen as soon as we started reading the book of Exodus? By the time we got into the 2nd chapter, all of the sons of the Hebrew people were being put. What was happening to them? They were being thrown in the Nile, and to drown and or be eaten by the crocodiles. So, and there's probably nothing more. I'm not even sure what right word to use is. When you feel so helpless, and that you cannot do anything to help your children in a situation like that. I mean, to have somebody come in and to take your brand new baby away, to take it out of your possession, to take it down, and you know they're going to throw it in the river. I don't think any of us could comprehend what kind of feeling that would be. You know, and that's what the Egyptians were doing to the Hebrews. And it even happens throughout a lot of the slave trade. You know, slavery was bad enough, but one of the additional atrocities of the slave trade, and especially in this country and in a lot of Europe, was that what happened with the slaves' children. They sold them, and usually it was like when they were anywhere from about 4 to 10, and there was nothing that the parents could do about it. And to know that was going to occur. And so that same thing that the Egyptians inflicted upon the Hebrews, now God is inflicting upon the Egyptians. And I think part of it goes back to that corporate, I'll get it right, corporate, I kept wanting to say corporate punishment, where the whole nation pays for the sins of the nation. You know, we've seen that a couple of other times that we've talked about it, that nobody said, there was only 2 people that would not do Well, when the first they said when the newborn boys are born to kill it, and there were two people who wouldn't do that. You remember who that was? The two midwives. And they went back and told Pharaoh, said, there's nothing we can do. Those women are so strong, man. They just, baby's there. They're not like the Egyptian women that scream all night and it takes them forever to have a baby, and we got time to get there. It's kind of what they're implying to Pharaoh through all that. They say they're young, they're virile, they're full of energy and strength, and the baby just comes before we can even get there. Not like the Egyptians, is pretty well what it says. And so they wouldn't do it, but the rest of the Egyptians didn't do it. You had Egyptian taskmasters that were beating people and all of that. And all of the Egyptians were involved in the slaves. And part of this whole story, as we ended up the book of Genesis, how did Joseph end up in Egypt? As a slave. And he ended up being in prison at no fault of his own, and all those sort of things. For many years, slaves had no rights. And so now these ones that did that to these, caused the Hebrews to go through this, are going to go through it now and on their own. So now one of the things too that a lot of people talk about, and I think it's probably a good place to talk about it as any, is if God is a good and just God, how could God kill these firstborn? They're not all little kids. It could be full-grown men and in their 60s or 70s. If you were the firstborn, I'm a firstborn, so if it was to happen today, I'd be one of them to be gone. It'd be me and DJ and then Maddox and Lincoln, just in our families, so all of us, that's the way it would have worked back then. Now, there's a couple things that come about it. And one of it is that God is a just God. And part of what God did in being a just God is that he never commanded Moses and Aaron to do anything. Everything else, they held out their staff, they raised their hands, they threw the dust in the air. They were participants in this. There is no human that is a participant in this judgment, because it is a judgment of a just God. And now, there is nothing that the Jews are supposed to do anything like this afterwards, or there is no. Now there are the cities under Joshua, and if we ever get to that, we'll talk about those then. And there were reasons for that, which disease and practices. Those people were burning their sons as sacrifices to their god, to Moloch. Throwing them alive. They called it passing through the fire. They would actually throw their children into a big fire and burn them alive. VD was they would sacrifice children. There are you can go and look. I don't know if you find it online or not, but I've got a couple study books that have jars, clay jars, that were in the foundations of homes. And you know what was in the clay jar? Their first child. That's how they dedicated their house and asked the blessing for the house. They sacrificed their child to the god to look over them and put the remains of the child in the house. And they've dug up, and one of the bad things about those, and when they've analyzed the bones, they found out that almost all of them had VD of one kind or another. And so there's a lot of reasons for those things that are separate than this. And both of them come down to a judgment, and a judgment by a just God. But that's what it is here. And sometimes, it's hard for us to understand why or how or what. And people will question God. And as a matter of fact, you get back here in the Psalms, and there's several of them say, how long, O Lord? Why are you letting this happen? And Jeremiah says those things, and others that are there. But it doesn't allow you not to have faith. You still trust and just say, God's got his reasons. And now, some people carry that too far. And in, things today, which I'll tell you is one of my pet peeves, is that somebody have a car wreck or there'll be some tragedy and people say, well, God needed them in heaven before that. No, God didn't say, tell some guy to go get drunk in a bar and drive drunk and run into someone. That's part of the sinful world in which that we live. There are times like this that God did those things, but God doesn't just randomly say, well, it's time for Sue to come to heaven. Somebody run over her with a car, or shoot her with a gun, or slit her throat, or something like that. That makes no sense. But anyway, but this one is, it's a little bit like, and I almost hate to use it but it's almost like what goes around comes around, or sow your bread up on the waters, comes back, and or treat others the way you want to be treated, and all those things. But whatever it is, this is the one of the plagues, and that's why it carries so much weight, is it was God alone. Moses just says at midnight, he tells the people what to do. That is all that he is doing, and he's standing waiting with the rest of them for whatever day that it is. But this is huge, and just imagine, which it does not say, but Moses is trying to tell Pharaoh, you can tell your people, he's telling them, and every time there's a conversation between those two, and we've talked about this a couple times, but I want to reemphasize it again. These were not one-on-one conversations. There would have been a lot of people in the room. When you were in the what they called the court, which wasn't like a courtroom we talked about at the courthouse, the throne room, or wherever Pharaoh happened to be, there were servants, there were all of his attendants, and there were the servants that were the ones that were bringing the food, doing this, doing that. The attendants are the ones that are looking after him, kind of as, like administrative type people. There were his ministers, today would be like the Secretary of Defense, or the Secretary of War, and the Treasury, and all those people that were there. When we read about Joseph, we know that there was the cupbearer, and there was the baker that was there, that would have fed him his pastries and all this kind of stuff. So there would have been, all these conversations are not 2 or 4 people. It's not like Moses and Aaron, and maybe Pharaoh and somebody else. These would have been in a crowd of people watching and listening. And so even if Pharaoh didn't put the word out, just think of the fear that struck through that crowd as they heard that. And if you're, 2 things. Like in our family, with me, if I'd have been standing there, I'd be thinking, oh man, that's me. And it's DJ, and it's Maddox, and it's Lincoln. And there's nothing I can do about that. And to think about that, what had you been one of those, what would you do? Or as that word is getting out. Or if you're the Robin of the family, who's my second brother, the next one under me, for him not just to be saying, well, that's not me, but that's going to be John. But then he's got Dylan, his son. Dylan's got we got 2 Maddox Overbys. Dylan's got a Maddox, and then there's both of his daughters have sons, and just so you can just think, everybody there, unless they were not the first son and all they had was girls, they'd had it. But what if one of the girls is married, and that's a firstborn son, or they have, it's one of those things that would have affected everybody. So I think the word would have gotten out pretty quick to the people around, and the panic. If you stop and think that somebody come in and said, one night, really soon, at midnight, you're going to die. Just what would they do to you? Or your son or your grandsons are going to die. Well, these nights at midnight, who could sleep? Huh?
I don't like waiting, just go ahead and do it.
Yeah, exactly. But see, the waiting, just think now if you were one of the Hebrew women that were pregnant. And back then they didn't test, they didn't know, boy or girl. And what that would be like. If it's a girl, I'm okay. What am I going to do if this is a boy? And all of that, and just God's putting them through what they put other people through. Now, there are other times in which those things have happened on a human scale. You know, the bombing of Germany that a lot of people have talked about. You know, when the Allies, carpet bombing doesn't even state it as bad. I can't remember which town it was. I used to know that they bombed so heavily and there was so much fire that it made a fire tornado in the town, whirlwind that stood there. But why did they bomb Germany like that? Because Germany bombed England and everybody else like that. Germany had no, you know, we've all seen the stuff about the air raid sirens going off and the people in England not being able to have any lights. Everybody headed for the bomb shelters. Same thing with Japan, with the things that they did to people all over the world, and nobody did anything to stop it. And they all participated in it, and so now retribution came back, and it's almost the same sort of thing. And so that's kind of why that's out there. Now, one of the things that happens after this too, and I'm going to jump way ahead chapters, was that God tells the people eventually, he said, from this point on, all firstborns belong to me. There, as a matter of fact, he said, you have to redeem them back. As far as humans are concerned. And we have one particular story about that. Do you remember what that story is? Mary and Joseph went up to Jerusalem, to the temple. It was a time of dedication in which they offered 2 pigeons because they were destitute, because the law says 2 pigeons or 2 turtle doves. The reason they were doing that was the purchase back of the firstborn. And if there were certain animals you could purchase back, there were others that you could not, that you had to actually break their neck and sacrifice the first animal to the Lord. The first of everything after this belongs to God going forward. So, you know, now the big point in all this too, starting with verse 6, is that there's a line, right? And before it always said Goshen, Egypt, Goshen, Egypt. This line's different. This line specifically says Egypt, Israel, and the contrast, loud wailing. I mean, just stop and think here in town, and you got to remember. Just think of it being summertime, pre-air conditioning. A lot of us don't like to think about pre-air conditioning, pre-window fan, and in a town this size, everybody, it's midnight, everybody's windows are open. And if something like that happened, what would this town sound like? You know, it's just hard to believe, when it talks about the wailing and things that would go on. Because how would you like to be the poor woman that lost a husband, a dad, a son, a grandson, all those things together? I mean, just... And all of that, and all the wailing that would be going on. But what was happening with the Israelites? It was so peaceful that what? A dog didn't even bark. It's that kind of a quiet night. So there's the difference between the two. This last difference. So God said, so that you will know that, that's verse 7. You will know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. And it's the Lord, not that the people make an exception, but the Almighty God does. And so, all this is going to occur. And I was looking for a line there that... and then what's he telling? What's the last thing he says? And all of your officials are going to do what?
Come to me.
They're going to bow down before me. They're not going to bow down before you. They're giving up on you. All your officials are going to bow down before me, and they're going to say, to heck with Pharaoh, leave. That's what that means. And say, go, you and all the people who follow you. After that, I will leave. So you've lost your kingdom, you've lost your food, you're going to lose your slaves, and you even lose your rule over your own people. They're going to bow down to me. They've been bowing down to you as a god. That's going to stop. They've been bowing down to you as a ruler. That's going to stop. Moses is going to have total control. When it first started, Moses had nothing. Pharaoh had everything. When it's over, Moses has everything. Pharaoh has nothing. And so then he says, what? After that, I'll leave. That's the way it's going to, you're going to, what's Moses been doing? Let my people go. Please release us. It's up to Pharaoh, right? Let us go. So now what's Moses say? I'll leave when I want to. I'm going to leave. I'll leave. Yeah, I'm going to leave when I want to. You're going to come and beg me to leave? I'll decide. And so we see things totally change in these about 10 chapters. So, so verse 9, the Lord had said to Moses, Pharaoh refused to listen to you, so that my wonders may be multiplied in Egypt. Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go out of the country. So that kind of sums it all up. And what's the point of all this? This is something we talk about at Advent every year. The Lord had said to Moses, God told him ahead of time, this is what is going to happen. How do you know God is God? And it's what we talk about at Advent, the prophecies of Jesus. How do we know Jesus is the one? Because God laid out all these things and said, this is going to, it's going to be a virgin birth. It's going to be at Bethlehem. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. And, the beatings, the whipping, the pulling of the beard, the cross, the being able to see all those things, they're all laid out ahead of time. So we know. That's what it is here. God lays it out ahead of time. And so God had told him, Moses, the way it was going to be, and now it's there. And this has been about a year or so, probably since Moses was first told or first met God at the burning bush. It would have taken quite a bit of time for him to, for one thing, get the flocks back to Jethro and say, I want to go. Jethro saying go, and then traveling back, and then all these things. And we talked about some of the seasons, and it kind of moved from the fall into the spring. So it's been a while. And so Moses and Aaron performed all the wonders before Pharaoh. They did their part. Then the rest is up to God. And whose fault is it? Pharaoh's, because he would not let the people go. So verse 12, or chapter 12. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, this month is to be for you the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for the whole lamb, they must share it with one of their nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people there are. You are determined the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the people of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood, put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of their houses where they eat the lambs. That same night they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or cooked in water, but roasted over the fire, head, legs, inner parts. Do not leave any of it until morning. If some is left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. So, a couple of things about this. For one, what do they say about the calendar? Yeah, this is the first month. First month, first day. And start counting, because it's the 10th day of the month. that you're supposed to pick out your lamb. Now, so did this, which is one of those questions we talked about, did this conversation in chapter 12 take place before 11? Because you got, God says this is the beginning of the calendar. And today is the first day, 10 days, you pick a lamb, 4 days later you slaughter it. So right there is 2 weeks. So Moses either had to tell all the people these things 2 weeks earlier, or the 2 weeks have passed since he left Aaron, or left Pharaoh, or somewhere in the middle. So it wouldn't have been any more than 2 weeks. But man, if it had been 2 weeks, so one of the things that I wonder about, if it was 2 weeks, did they get to that? You know, the first few nights you would have been scared to death. Maybe the first third or so, second third's kind of a wonder. But some people would have got to the point they would have said, "What? It ain't gonna happen." And then it does, which could make it even worse. Or those that truly believe this is going to occur sometime, to wait for 2 weeks, wondering every night, would have been horrible, a horror, not just horrible. And now, so the actual name of the month is Abib or Nisan. They still celebrate it today. Now, the Jews have 2 calendars, and there were 2 of them in the Bible that they went by. There are 2 today. One is called the civil calendar, and the other one the religious calendar. Does anything like that happen today? Let's see, that's the 20th. So you know what the 27th is of November? No. Sunday's the 20th, and then the next Sunday's the 27th after Thanksgiving. That's the Sunday after Thanksgiving. Which is what? She said the beginning of Advent, which is partly true. Huh? Nope. It is the Christian New Year. That is when we start counting from a faith standpoint. That is the first day of Advent is the first day of the Christian year. So we actually operate off of 2 calendars. We have a religious calendar, because then we have Advent, we have Christmas, and we have Epiphany or baptism. And then we have Lent, and then we have Easter, all Palm Sunday, Easter, Good Friday, all that. Then we have Pentecost, and there's a few other days thrown in the middle, including what's coming up next week from today. All Saints Sunday, first Sunday in November. The last Sunday of the Christian year is Christ the King Sunday. That's the one before Thanksgiving. The last Sunday before Advent, we have Trinity Sunday. We have a lot of things. And do they just fall at any time during the year? No, they all have their place. Sometimes, and the one that bounces around the most is Lent and Easter, because Lent starts 40 days before, you're not counting Sundays, and Easter is always the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. So that's why it kind of moves around. And the Jewish calendars are about the same way. They operate off of the moon. So this one starts in the spring, and actually, it's like I said, it's the month of Abib, which was a Hebrew term, or Nisan, which was a Babylonian term, and that word means new head of grain, which is usually new head of grain. Which you get your new heads of grain in what season? Spring. And so typically when it's Passover, about the same time as Easter, because it's also figured on the moon and that sort of thing. Now, the other Jewish calendar it just started a month or so back with the Rosh Hashanah. I don't know if you remember celebrating that. That calendar starts in the beginning with what? In the beginning. They think that one starts with the first day of creation, is how they see that. So most of the Jewish people, for the most part, operate off of the secular calendar, or the one that starts in the fall. but they count the religious days from the one that starts in the spring, much the same way that the Christians do. And this is also, sometimes some of them feel like this is the beginning of the nation. They had never been a nation or a group of people until then, and so they start counting the calendar then. So this time of Passover, in a way, is also celebrated as just like we do the 4th of July, Independence Day. It's a day that they celebrate. They got independence from Pharaoh, from slavery, to be a people or a nation or whatever, the same way that we celebrate 4th of July. So the whole community, everybody, you're going to see that word or that term a lot, the whole community. So now, everybody is to have how much food? A lamb. So how many people do you think a lamb will feed? Yeah. Usually they figured about 30 to 40. It's a year-old lamb. It's not the little baby lamb. It's a year-old lamb, almost full grown. So everybody, don't think of the little cute little thing that Jesus always carrying in his arm in the pictures and all that kind of stuff. This would have been a year-old animals, typically right close to being full grown. So that's why it says, if there's not enough in your family to eat a whole one, what are you supposed to do? Share it. Hook up with somebody else so that there's no waste. And anything that's left over is to be what? Burned. Why would you burn it? So why would you want anybody to eat it? She said so nobody can eat it.
God said not to.
Yeah, because God said not to. Yeah, that's the best reason. So, but it's that thing that it is there. It is a sacrifice. It is for a special reason, and so you don't denigrate the importance of it by being casual with it, and it basically becomes your leftovers and your lunch and that kind of. It's almost yeah. I wouldn't have made a good Middle Easterner. I really don't care for lamb, but goat's pretty good. But anyway, yeah, what was I going to say? Oh, it's along the same line that some cultures, if you use dishes, and there's a lot of the Greeks and the Baltic nations do that, or some of the Baltic people. So you have a wedding or you have a baptism, you have something that's really special that you use your plates for. What do they do with them after that? They break them so that they can't ever be used again on anything that is not as important as that was. That preserves the sanctity of it, and that's kind of what they're doing with the burning of the meat. And now, I want you to think about a couple things. These people are slaves, right? So what do you think they would have been eating up to this time? Not much, and probably not meat, for two reasons. One of those is, have they been sacrificing any lambs or any animals up to this point? Nope. Why? Because they were considered to be gods by the Egyptians, and that's the first thing Moses tells them, Pharaoh, the first time, about the 3 days. No, we got to go 3 days, because if we don't go 3 days, you're going to have a civil war. We're going to be sacrificing animals that the Egyptians don't believe you should kill, and there's going to be problems between. That's why we got to go 3 days journey out, so that nobody's going to see it. Now we're going to do it in front of you, and we don't care what you think. There's another big difference. First one is we got to worry about what you think, because it's going to cause us trouble. Then we get to the point we don't care what you think. And on top of that, we're going to have it with us for 4 days in preparation for that. And now the other part of that is too, slaves have been eating slave food, and now they're being told, you're going to be offered meat. Take this animal, hang on to it for 4 days. There's two things that goes along with that. One of it is anticipation of a feast for people that did feast. And especially some of these, this could be the first time they've ever had meat in their lives. If they've not been able to sacrifice, and the Egyptians saw the animals, remember they had a ram god, they had a calf or a bull god, they had gods for everything, and so they weren't allowed to kill those animals. So if you're not killing any animals, you're probably not eating meat. They probably would have had milk and cheese and all those kind of things. But now, you know, I mean, think about that. If you've never had meat in your life, and all of a sudden somebody says, we're gonna cook an animal, we're gonna eat it, and some people would, you know, there's just something going along with that, trying to know what is this going to be, and what's this going to be like, and all that, which I think that's part of it, where God gives them instructions on how to cook it. You know, you don't eat it raw. You don't cook it in water. You don't boil it in water. You roast it. And this time, and actually this way of roasting it with everything on it, including the insides in it, there are Bedouins and things in that, and the whole kind of Eastern Mediterranean and Southern Mediterranean that, you know, basically across the north of Africa and up around almost and into Turkey, they still eat animals in that same way today. Part of it too is saying you're not an animal. You don't eat it raw. You know, that's you even treat the animal with respect and the way that you eat it. You don't leave any of it left over. And now there are some that think that part of it, because, you know, we're going to, I think before the book is over, those laws are in Exodus, we're going to get to the point about you don't eat anything with blood in it. The blood belongs to God. Blood is life. We can take that on up to Jesus and why that was so important there. But God always says the blood belongs to me, the life belongs to me, and all of that. And Jews are commanded, even today, Jews will not eat, well, let me say, good practicing Jews or Orthodox Jews. Maybe that's a better way to put it, because I'm not sure about the Reformed Jews. Like to get a steak, not, of course they can't eat pork, but it has to be medium well or well done. It cannot have any blood in it. No, she likes it that way. I almost chase mine around the plate to make sure it's dead. But that way, this way of roasting it would mean that there was no blood left in it, and so they were going to keep it for these 4 days, and then roast it over the fire. And what else are they supposed to have?
Their cloak tucked in.
No, on verse 8.
Oh,
Bitter herbs.
Unleavened bread.
Unleavened bread without yeast. So why would they have them eat bitter herbs? It actually translates into later. You know, here it's just saying eat bitter herbs. And I'm sure people are thinking, why would I eat bitter herbs? You know, with all the things that are there. Probably chicory, and there's 2 or 3 others. They use a lot of horseradish today for that, but there's really nothing mentioned about. I don't think horseradish wasn't anything that was in Egypt. Do what? Well, they do now, but the salt water. But the whole thing is, once they start to come after the first one, when they start to commemorate it, there's always bitter herbs there to do what? To remind you of the bitterness of slavery. And and then the unleavened bread. Why would there be unleavened bread? Yep. It comes down to the last sentence, the next to last phrase in it. Eat it in haste. You know, the whole verse 11, this is how you eat it. Your cloak tucked in your belt, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste, it's the Lord's Passover. So, can you make bread in haste if it's got yeast in it? No. So, unleavened bread. Actually, if you get unleavened bread today, if you go and you buy matzah bread, you know what it looks like? No. They're about that size. About that square. Looks like a big saltine cracker. and it's got holes punched in it. It's got stripes on it. I mean, just from the way it's cooked and things, which means something different for the Christians than it does for the Jews and all that. But for the most part, it would have been about like a tortilla shell or something. It would have just been the wheat and whatever they put in it to make a liquid, pour it on a rock and cook it, eat it that way. And so eat it in haste. The whole point is, and how are they eating it? Not just how they're dressed, but they're to be standing when they eat it, shoes on your feet, staff in your hand, and what was the other thing that they had to do? Do what? Yep. Gather up their skirt, tuck it in their belt. Why would you do that? So you can move faster and move along. You know, slaves don't need to move fast, but when it comes time to hustling, now that doesn't mean, you know, they drew it all up, but to get it off of your lower legs so that you can move in a hurry. That's what the whole thing is about. When that time comes, and that's the message that's being given to them, although he's not saying it here, that they understand. Be ready. Because when the word comes, and if you're, and it wouldn't be easy, and then we're getting just about that time or a little past, but let me make this last point. What's the one concern if you're a slave and somebody's going to say, I'm going to turn you loose?
Change your mind.
You're going to change your mind, is what Marty said. That's exactly right. So when you go, are you going to want to, don't dilly-dally. You're going to want to have your shoes on your feet, your staff in your hand. You're going to be hitting the road running and not to come back. So they understood what that meant. When Moses told them, shoes on your feet, staff in your hand, standing up, eating in haste, you know, and all of that with especially with your skirt tucked in your waist. When it comes time, we're booking. You know, everybody needs to be ready. They probably, because of all that, you know, there's the implied things about whatever you're going to have, you need to have ready. And, you know, and they, of course, they wouldn't have had a lot, and it says later, a lot of them, whatever they carried, it was in a bowl, you know, was how they carried a lot of it. So we'll stop there, and we'll pick up with verse 12 next time. Man, I'm telling you, we got through a chapter and a half. So, all right. Well, hope you learned something. And hope you have a good evening. That all of you are blessed in all that you do, and that you are a blessing to others. And I hope you enjoyed it. And we'll catch you, like the old saying goes, from back when we were kids. Next week, be sure and be tuned in. Next week, same time, same station. See ya.